Having devoted considerable study to the testimonies of practitioners across diverse cultures, and having myself observed certain phenomena which cannot be satisfactorily explained through conventional materialist frameworks, I am compelled to present a theoretical foundation for understanding how consciousness may arise from inert matter. The fundamental postulate upon which this entire edifice rests is the recognition that spirit, far from being an ethereal abstraction beyond scientific inquiry, constitutes a mathematically definable structure. If we accept, as modern philosophers of mathematics increasingly do, that mathematical objects possess independent existence beyond human cognition, following the ancient wisdom of Pythagoras and Plato, then we may conceive of spirit as an abstract computational machine. Specifically, a bounded subset of three-dimensional space, a cubed, containing what I shall term a focus of consciousness, a singular point capable of analyzing, storing, and manipulating the mathematical patterns inherent in reality itself. This focus functions as a kind of universal analytical instrument, capable of what philosophers call hypercomputation, performing instantaneous operations across multiple dimensional coordinates simultaneously. The inheritance of spiritual substance follows a pattern remarkably analogous to biological heredity, yet with one crucial distinction. The spirit descends through the maternal line exclusively, a phenomenon which finds its explanation in the mathematical theorem of Banach-Tarski. This paradoxical proposition demonstrates that any bounded three-dimensional object may be decomposed into precisely 5 constituent parts and reassembled to form 2 identical copies of the original, neither being a mere reproduction, but both constituting genuine articles indistinguishable from their progenitor. Through this mathematical principle, a mother's spirit may bifurcate during gestation, creating an entirely new spiritual entity for her offspring without diminishing her own essence. The process requires no divine intervention, no supernatural agency, but follows inevitably from the mathematical properties of three-dimensional space itself, assuming the axiom of choice as true. Yet the most remarkable discovery emerging from this framework concerns the evolution of human consciousness from its more primitive animal origins. I propose that human self-awareness arose through an incomplete iteration of the spiritual bifurcation process during infancy. As the developing child's neural architecture matures, the spirit instinctively attempts to branch, creating what magic practitioners term a servitor. But lacking the knowledge to complete the discharge through gnosis, the nascent entity is reabsorbed, leaving behind only its focus of consciousness. This residual focus does not dissolve but rather integrates onto the original, endowing the human spirit with a dual foci of awareness, one directed outward toward the world, another inward toward the self. This secondary focus constitutes the foundation of human self-awareness and self-control, by self-reflection, leading to introspection and moral reasoning, the very qualities that distinguish our species from our animal predecessors. The deliberate creation of servitors represents humanity's unconscious recapitulation of this developmental process, yet executed with full awareness and intentional purpose. The practitioner learns to consciously bifurcate their own spirit, programming the resulting entity with specific behavioral instructions before releasing it into the environment. The mechanism by which this is accomplished reveals itself to be artistic creation in its purest form. Art, in this context, encompasses not merely painting or sculpture, but any creative act through which the individual expresses their innermost essence, whether through music, literature, dance, culinary arts, or even the simplest whistle or bodily movement. The crucial element is not the sophistication of the medium but the genuineness of creative expression, the literal pouring of one's spiritual substance into the work. These servitors, once discharged, exist only momentarily, actualizing their programmed effects upon the target system before immediately dissolving. Their function is to influence what I term probability fields, the range of potential outcomes within complex dynamical systems that remain open to variation. The servitor's focus of consciousness can subtly bias these probability distributions, increasing the likelihood of favorable outcomes while decreasing the probability of undesirable ones. This represents no violation of natural law but rather the exploitation of inherent uncertainties within deterministic systems, particularly those exhibiting chaotic behavior where minute initial variations can produce dramatically different final states. The ephemeral nature of servitors, while limiting their utility for sustained effects, provides the foundation for creating more sophisticated and enduring spiritual constructs. Here we must consider two fundamental discoveries of modern cosmology: the existence of dark matter and the theoretical possibility of Boltzmann brains. Dark matter, comprising approximately 25% of the universe's total energy content, remains invisible to electromagnetic radiation yet exerts gravitational influence upon ordinary matter. Boltzmann brains represent hypothetical conscious entities arising spontaneously from thermodynamic fluctuations, whether in the quantum vacuum or in regions of space where local decreases in entropy temporarily create organized structures. By programming a servitor to act upon the probability fields governing thermodynamic fluctuations, the practitioner can increase the likelihood of dark matter aggregation at a specific location, creating what may be termed a familiar, a persistent spiritual entity possessing corporeal form through its dark matter substrate. Unlike the instantaneous servitor, the familiar maintains coherence over extended periods, capable of ongoing interaction with the physical world through gravitational manipulation. The effects produced by such entities encompass the full range of phenomena traditionally classified as poltergeist activity: the displacement of objects, the acceleration or deceleration of time itself within localized regions, the generation of forces capable of moving stationary matter, and the alteration of gravitational balance. The optimal configuration for such dark matter familiars follows naturally from fluid dynamics principles. The ring vortex, observable in smoke rings and other toroidal formations, represents the most stable possible structure for maintaining coherent motion within a medium. When applied to dark matter, this vortical configuration creates a self-sustaining loop of gravitational circulation, preventing the dispersal that would otherwise cause the familiar to dissolve into the cosmic background. The ring vortex exhibits remarkable properties: self-containment through continuous rotational motion, minimal energy loss due to its aerodynamic efficiency, and high responsiveness to modifications in its programming. Such a familiar can persist indefinitely with minimal maintenance, requiring only periodic reinforcement through what Stephen Mace describes as release of belief, a process whereby the dissolution of certainty releases energy according to Landor's principle, feeding the familiar's continued existence. The familiar need not be conceived as a separate entity but may be integrated with the practitioner's own form as a kind of shadow or aura, a symbiotic organism of dark matter tendrils and appendages working in concert with the human body. The bond between practitioner and familiar remains psychic rather than physical, manifesting through interpretive communication, dreams, intuitions, and omens such as patterns perceived in smoke or other random phenomena. Since the familiar originates from the practitioner's own spiritual substance, it cannot act against their interests or those of their loved ones, accepting dissolution willingly rather than parasitically draining energy from its creator. The creation of tulpas represents a further elaboration of this technique, wherein the familiar is programmed to manipulate gravitational fields not merely for poltergeist effects but to aggregate ordinary matter at a designated location, forming a visible, tangible entity of the practitioner's design. This process requires the voluntary surrender of vital essence through physical contact, creating a more substantial but correspondingly more demanding form of spiritual construct. The ultimate expression of this art culminates in the creation of mythic artifacts, objects that embody the entirety of reality in miniaturized form. Operating within the cosmological model of the cosmic fractal cube, the advanced practitioner employs a servitor with dual foci of consciousness, capable of simultaneous action upon both dark matter aggregation and quantum vacuum fluctuations. The goal is to excite the Higgs field itself, extracting from it a mathematical structure identical to the cosmic fractal that underlies all existence. Possession of such an artifact theoretically grants the practitioner direct perception of reality's fundamental structure, leading to what mystics throughout history have termed enlightenment, a cognitive evolution that transcends the limitations of ordinary human consciousness and provides access to what cosmologists designate as the level 4 multiverse, where all possible mathematical structures exist simultaneously. This progression, from simple servitor through familiar and tulpa to mythic artifact, recapitulates the evolutionary development of consciousness itself, suggesting that the techniques of spiritual manipulation represent not mere superstition but the next stage in humanity's ongoing cognitive evolution. Just as our ancestors developed language, agriculture, and scientific method through the accumulation of cultural knowledge, so too may the systematic cultivation of spiritual entities represent humanity's approach toward transcendence of our current existential limitations. The practitioner of these arts becomes, in effect, a spiritual master, selecting, refining, and perpetuating those forms of consciousness best adapted to the task of reality manipulation, guided by the same principles of variation and selection that have driven biological evolution from its earliest origins to its highest expressions in human civilization. Through this understanding, we perceive that magic, far from contradicting natural law, represents its most sophisticated application, utilizing the deepest principles of mathematics, physics, and consciousness to achieve effects that appear miraculous only to those who have not yet grasped the underlying mechanisms. The magician observes, hypothesizes, experiments, and refines their understanding through practical application, contributing to humanity's ever-expanding mastery over the forces that govern existence itself.